And Larry, why don't you share a little bit about who you are and what you do? You're the president of ASCM Rochester.
Somebody set me up. So thank you, Ben. And thank you all. And thank you all for coming. But thank you, Ben Albert, for really pulling this thing together. Ben's our director of marketing, and we're going to tag about 3 or 4 other titles before we're done today. But yes, we'd like to welcome you to upstate New York. So good morning for those on the West Coast or beyond there, and good afternoon on the East Coast. So our Association for Supply Chain Management here in Rochester, New York, is hosting this event, and this is probably going to be our first event in quite a while. So for those of you who thought we closed for the season, it's not true. The board has been working hard to pull together educational opportunities in supply chain. And I'm sure most everybody probably has heard of ASCM, the Association for Supply Chain Society. But if you don't, we're one of a few different organizations that teach supply chain management. And like any other organization like ours, there's different levels. And we do consider ourselves the premier group for educating. So if your job has to do with inventory planning or production scheduling or setting staffing levels for production or even purchasing, then we're probably your best mousetrap for helping you to navigate that complex environment in the most efficient way. So that's who we are. And a little bit, just a brief thing about myself. I've been associated with this board since 1992, believe it or not. And my life has been in supply chain. And I have found this organization to be very welcoming and a very safe place for me to get better at my career. And that's why I've stayed with this organization for as many years as I have. So that's me, Larry Maggio, president of ASCM Rochester.
Thank you, Larry. Let's go into why we're all here today. A fantastic presentation from Rosemary. Rosemary Coates is the founder and executive director at the Reshoring Institute, a nonprofit focused on expanding U.S. manufacturing. She's also president of Blue Silk Consulting, a global supply chain management firm. Over 35 years of experience, several best-selling books, even an expert witness on supply chain in court. She also teaches supply chain strategy at the top of universities. I had to cut the bio because the amount of things that she's doing that are amazing in the industry is unbelievable. Rosemary, thank you for coming here for this Lunch and Learn, and I want to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Ben. Okay, everybody, here we go. We're going to talk about reshoring and what's happening in the big world of reshoring these days. Quite the topic. And then also about leaving China. So just reshoring is only half of the story. I think it's very important to understand how difficult it may be to extract yourself from a foreign location. So over the next few minutes, we're going to go through a little bit of background about reshoring, and then talk about some of the issues you may encounter if you're trying to get out of China or trying to stop sourcing in China, some of the things that you're going to experience. All right, here we go. This is a little bit about me. As Ben mentioned a while back, I've been doing this a long time, 35 plus years. I am the executive director and founder of the Reshoring Institute, and also I have my own consulting firm. My consulting firm does global supply chain management. I spent many years helping companies offshore to China, and as I'm sort of a Chinese manufacturing expert. And then I'll explain how we got started at the Reshoring Institute in a minute. The books that I've written are along the bottom. The one on the far left is the red book. That's 42 Rules for Sourcing and Manufacturing in China. That was a bestseller for quite some time. Not anymore. It's kind of getting old. It was a 2009 publication, but it was hot at the time. Everyone was trying to get to China, and so that book was the first one that I wrote and was quite popular. I have a business logistics degree before they called it supply chain management, and from Arizona State. I'm that old. First, it was transportation management, then logistics, and then supply chain. So I was back in the logistics era, and an MBA from the University of San Diego, where I am now on the board at the Supply Chain Management Institute there. Okay. I also have a podcast called the Frictionless Supply Chain Podcast, which is focused on women leaders in supply chain. And so I've interviewed a group of fantastic women over the last couple of years. We post our podcasts on our website at reshoringinstitute.org if you're interested. You can go there under the podcast tab and you can see all the podcasts that we've done and listen to them. I'm also a contributing writer to Supply Chain Management Review. I have a monthly column there and write at least one big annual article for the Supply Chain Management Review. They are also the hosts of my podcast. So podcasts are published on Supply Chain Management Review website. Okay, a little bit background about the Reshoring Institute. We have a dual mission. So first is to provide research and consulting services for companies that are bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. And then the second part of our mission is to provide experiential education for university students to help them learn about global sourcing and manufacturing. And in fact, we have an intern on the line with us today, Jojo Ortega. She's our crack intern this semester and has been helping us with the big projects. And we're really proud of her and the work that she's doing. Our student interns work 100 paid hours per semester, and that's on directed research or consulting projects that we have. They help us write a lot of white papers and case studies also. Down below, you can see a list of the universities we're affiliated with. Today, we have 18 universities where we take interns. And we're adding new universities all the time. So you can see maybe your university is included there, or maybe it will be in the future. Okay, in the 1990s and 2000s, offshoring to China was the economic strategy of U.S. manufacturers. And because I was in supply chain management, my clients were asking me to help them get to China or to find sources in China. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. So it was the thing to do. And a lot of clients were not all that interested in doing a lot of analysis. They were simply telling me, help me get to China. And so I became pretty good at it. This is a picture of the Forbidden City in Beijing, if you've ever been there. It's where the emperors and empresses lived for 500 years. It's a big museum these days with 999 rooms. There's a reason for that. 10,000 is the number of the emperor or the number of heaven. And so it's just under that. They keep the number of rooms just under that. But it's a fantastic place to visit. And I think it represents the rich history of China, as well as a foundation for moving forward in how they developed the economic miracle that China is today. While I was in China, I visited many, many, many factories. And this is one in particular that was quite outstanding. So I was working on an automotive project in Beijing and with an automotive company. And one morning I came to work and the purchasing manager said they were going off to visit a machine shop. Did I want to come with them? And so I said, of course, I love visiting factories all over the world. It's quite interesting. So we went to do a factory tour, and you can see the people standing in the middle here. I don't know if you can see my pointer or not. But these are my colleagues from the company that I was working for. And so we drove out. This was in the Fifth Ring Road in Beijing. And if you have been there, you know there are sequentially further and further out ring roads around the city. So this one was the Fifth Ring Road and was about maybe an hour and a half from central Beijing. And so we drove there and got up to, pulled up to the factory, and the manager came out and greeted us and said that he had to take a conference call and he'd be back in about 10 minutes. So just go ahead and look around. So that was kind of my first indication this was going to be a different kind of visit. If any of you have ever been to a factory before, you know you're not allowed to just wander around the factory, right? You're always escorted. And typically you have some kind of eye protection, toe protection, sometimes a hard hat. These things are common and required in the US for sure, in Western Europe, but in China, not so much. So we walked down the middle aisle. We were chatting with people. That my colleagues were talking to this guy, this machinist that was working on one of their parts in the middle of the factory. The first thing that I noticed on the bottom right-hand side, you can see this guy here operating a machine tool. He was cutting metal. He had no gloves, no eye protection, no hard hat, no lead apron, no toe protection. In fact, he had those little black cloth Chinese shoes on. And he was operating this, what I would think was a very dangerous machine. Then I noticed, so as we're walking along here, then I noticed the yellow lines. So if you've been in a factory before, you know there are always yellow lines in the factory, and you're not supposed to cross the yellow lines. It's a safety issue. It's an OSHA issue. And they try very hard to keep people within the yellow lines. And you can see here, you can barely make out the yellow lines. And the people I was working with, accompanied me to the factory, were walking in and out of the machines and so forth. So we got about halfway down, and I'm looking around. I've been to enough machine shops to know this was pretty dangerous. So I sort of backed up and thought this is too dangerous for me, and asked him if I could take pictures. So this is another very funny thing to me, because in most factories you're not allowed to take pictures. It's you're actually, you know, would be capturing IP, and there are all kinds of reasons why they don't want you to take a picture of the factory. It may be a safety issue or potentially a lawsuit, something like that. But they said to me, sure, go ahead and take pictures. So I got up on the mezzanine and started snapping photos. Now, this particular machine shop was half owned by the Chinese government and half privately owned. So it was a public-private partnership. And it was, according to my colleagues, a really outstanding machine shop. They were producing parts that were very high quality. And my colleagues were about to award them a very large contract. The reason why I point out all the things in the factory here is because although there are safety laws and sort of like OSHA laws in the US, they're not essentially followed. So in this particular machine shop, they weren't using protective materials or for the people, or following essentially the rules and the laws that have been implemented. And that contributes to the overall low cost of the operation. So even though this factory was producing very high quality parts, the overall cost was pretty low. This little guy up here in front at the time was making $3.63 per hour, which was pretty good wages for China at the time. This was I would say roughly 10 years ago. We did at the Reshoring Institute a study. We compared job titles such as machine tool operator, which is what this guy is, in several countries around the world. And this guy, as I mentioned, was making $3.63 an hour. The same job that we researched in the US, the operator would have been making $26.10 an hour. And in Europe, $32 and change per hour. So the difference in the wages at the time was quite significant, maybe about a tenth of the cost, 10th or 12th of the cost of the same job in the US. So there's low cost labor and a low cost environment. And that's what was driving most of the economic issues to go to China at the time. Today's environment, the wages in China have gone up, but even if they doubled, you can see it's still significantly cheaper to manufacture in China. This happened to be a very large machine shop also. There were 4 or 5 bays to the right here, one of the largest machine shops that I've ever seen. So it was a low-cost operation producing high-quality parts. And that was essentially the argument that we made for companies taking their business offshore. So, how did this all happen? The movement to come back to the US? Well, I've been helping all these companies offshore to China for a number of years. I did that for about 15 years. And along came the 2012 presidential election. Remember that? Back in the days when it wasn't quite so crazy. So, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney were both were running for president, and they were both China bashing like crazy. They were both saying our economic problems are all due to China. China is undercutting our labor rates. They're manipulating currency. They're taking our jobs, and on and on and on. And here I am helping companies offshore to China, and I'm thinking, holy cow. I can't tell anybody what I do for a living. This is awful. And so they created this environment where people started being concerned, I think, about moving to China and started kind of an anti-China movement. So this was really the catalyst. This was 2012, 12 years ago. And it was the tipping point for companies and executives asking me if they could potentially build anything in America. And so, we started talking to our clients about the potential for bringing manufacturing back, and eventually developed a methodology, and then eventually started the Reshoring Institute. Okay, so what's happened over the past 12 years? There certainly has been a change in the global supply chain environment. Major changes have happened. Now we're talking about long international supply chains. In the past, maybe your supply chain included, buying something from somebody in Chicago or Los Angeles. Today's environment, this could be sourcing anywhere in the world. And every time you have a change of hands in supply chain, so from the manufacturer to the transportation carrier to the freight forwarder, the warehouseman, all those, every time there's a change of hands, you introduce a point of risk. And so the risk factor in these long global supply chains increased significantly. There was a total globalization. People started thinking and acting on sourcing and manufacturing worldwide. There was certainly an increase in geopolitics. We didn't worry so much about that in 2010 about geopolitics, but today's environment, the geopolitical situation and the relationship between the U.S. and China is not good. It is not good, and it could have all kinds of ramifications. Of course, remember under the Trump administration, he began trade wars. which were the application of tariffs on incoming parts from China and China's retaliation by taxing or putting a tariff on imports into China. So we may have put a tariff on electronic goods in the U.S., and China retaliated by putting a tariff on agricultural goods imported into China. During this period, we saw a rise in global counterfeiting. This is a big problem, a big issue around the world. As I mentioned before, I do expert witness work, and a lot of the cases that I work on involve counterfeits coming from China. If you remember back to the pandemic, I know we all try to forget it, but if you remember, there was a lot of PPE coming into the US that was counterfeit. It didn't work properly. It was irregular. There were all sorts of issues. And I've been involved in a number of those legal cases, big legal cases involving imported parts. But it's not just PPE. Global counterfeiting has a heavy investment in electronics as well. So every time I get on an airplane and I buckle my seatbelt and sit still, I think, oh my God, I hope there aren't any counterfeits in the avionics system. Because electronics are very ripe for global counterfeiting. And it's become a serious, big worldwide problem and a subject for another day. The rise of lean manufacturing and lean methodologies. Most of you probably are practicing lean in your company, and that means you're focused on improving the efficiency, taking unnecessary costs out of your supply chains. There's been a big rise in that and the application of lean throughout the world. But of course, during the pandemic, we found out how that could make us vulnerable as well. With lean, you have very little supply chain inventory. And when you don't have inventory and you can't get it, then you have to shut down your manufacturing operations. In fact, Hyundai in Korea was practicing lean manufacturing, and within a week of shutting down the Wuhan area, and Wuhan was the big city in China where the virus originated, they completely shut down that city. And Wuhan is sort of the Detroit of China. It's where a lot of the automotive parts come from. Hyundai in Korea was practicing lean manufacturing and had almost nothing in their pipeline. It was just in time production. And within a week, they had to shut down their production facilities because they could not get parts out of Wuhan, China. And that went on off and on for about 3 months. It was really a terrible situation. A lot of other companies couldn't get parts out of China also. It affected inventory levels as well as production levels worldwide. The pandemic is something I'd like to forget. But it certainly had an effect on anybody working in supply chain, knowing you couldn't move things around the world. It was difficult to source anything. You couldn't get on an airplane, go visit your customer or your supplier, either one. And just, threw a monkey wrench into all global supply chain operations. Then the war in Ukraine seems like that's somewhere else, in the world. But one of the things, the war in Ukraine has affected all kinds of things in supply chains. And one of the most important is that Ukraine manufactures neon gas. They're one of the biggest producers of neon gas in the world. In fact, somewhere around 45% of the neon gas is produced in Ukraine. And the Russians bombed the neon factories very early on. So those were some of the first ones that went. Now, neon gas is used in all kinds of production, particularly semiconductors. Now, if you think back a few months ago, maybe a year or two ago, there was a shortage of semiconductors around the world. Do you remember that? Part of that was due to semiconductors being produced to support laptop computers and other consumer electronics that were in high demand during the pandemic. But part of it was due to a lack of a neon gas, so semiconductors couldn't be produced. And that contributed majorly to that semiconductor shortage around the world. So even though the war in Ukraine is far, far away, it has affected all sorts of supply chains, such as neon gas, but also food production and other things. And then finally, the big thing now, and if you're in any kind of industry that's related to particularly apparel manufacturing, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act has been established by the U.S. government and is enforced by U.S. Customs for any products that are coming from Zhejiang province in far western China. And this is a province where there are minority groups, primarily Muslims in this particular area. And China has decided that they want to re-educate these people. And so they put them into big camps, sort of prison camps. They're considered prisoners, and they make stuff in factories in this area of China, in the Uyghur region. So the U.S. government does not allow any imports that are made with prison labor, and that's a law that's been on the books since the 1920s. But the Uyghur Forced Labor Act put an additional layer on that, and the U.S. government has decided that we will not import anything that's made by Uyghur forced labor. And that, I think the biggest category is apparel, because the Uyghur area is where they grow a lot of cotton, and they have big textile factories there. But it also affects things like TV remotes, which are almost all made in Zhejiang province worldwide. So next time you pick up your remote to change the channels, it's probably made in Zhejiang province. So the U.S. government has stopped all imports from the Uyghur region. A little bit more about Uyghurs. So any goods that are mined, produced, or manufactured in Zhejiang province are presumed made with forced labor. And so the U.S. government has taken a view that you are guilty until proven innocent. If you have anything coming from the Uyghur region, or goods that go from the Uyghur region maybe to another part of China for production, but can be traced back to original Uyghur labor, is stopped from being imported into the U.S. Now just think about how difficult that might be. If you are a producer of, say, men's shirts in Shenzhen, China, on the eastern seaboard, and you have a factory there that's making shirts for, say, JCPenney or Target or Kohl's, and your manufactured goods are being imported into the U.S., and U.S. Customs says, wait a minute, we have a container load of shirts, but prove to me that there's no Uyghur labor involved. So the U.S. Importer must be able to prove there was no cotton grown in the Uyghur region that went into the textiles, that went into the fabric, that was made into the shirts that were being imported into the U.S. This is a masterclass in tracing your supply chain. And the U.S. government says, nope, can't import anything until you prove to me there is no cotton, Uyghur cotton in that product. And it is incredibly difficult to do that. The U.S. Customs Service can test the materials using DNA testing also. So it isn't like you can just say, well, there's no Uyghur content, we're sure of it. They're going to test it to make sure that Uyghur cotton didn't come from that Uyghur region. This is a major, major shift for many manufacturers. And I think this just went into effect about a year ago. I think you're going to hear more and more about Uyghur forced labor as we go forward. So why are companies reshoring now? Well, the mood of America has certainly changed. There's a rise of ethnocentrism, which means focused on the U.S. Or focused internally. The Tax Reform Act of 2017. This is a Trump administration act that reduced the cost of the taxes, the tax rate on factories in the US from about 28% down to 21%. So a big reduction in taxes. And you would think, I mean, the intent was to bring all this manufacturing back to the US because the taxes were lower. And what happened? Kind of nothing. Um, the difference in tax rate was either pocketed by these companies, used to buy back stock. Sometimes there was investment in equipment and so forth, but by and large, it had almost no effect on manufacturing in the U.S. The Trump administration has also indicated they want to go reduce that tax rate even further to 15%. And the intention, once again, is to draw or bring back manufacturing to the U.S. So we'll see if that happens. The worldwide tax rate, so on average, if you were to look at the tax rate in, say, France or Poland or South America somewhere, the average tax rate on factories manufacturing goods around the world is 24%. So in the US, currently at 21% and potentially 15%, we have a very low tax rate for manufacturing. Then there are the 232 and 301 tariffs on imports into the US. The 232 tariffs are on aluminum and steel. And apply to multiple countries, and the 301 are the penalty tariffs on imports from China. Those are intended to have the effect to draw manufacturing back to the U.S. once again, and very little action happened with those tariffs. It was more companies that were importing parts or finished products simply absorbed that cost, that additional cost, into their cost structures or passed it on to their customers. And now the Trump administration has indicated, and by the way, those tariffs continued forward through the Biden administration as well. And now the Trump administration is saying they want to put even bigger tariffs on imports, particularly from China, but also Mexico and Canada. And if that happens, once again, companies are likely to either absorb that cost into their product cost and then pass it on to their customers. So we'll see. It's likely to have a big economic effect on manufacturing. And if the tariff rate is like 60%, then it probably will drive manufacturing back to the US or more likely to Mexico. The global pandemic certainly was a wake-up call to all of us in supply chain and our companies, where we reconsidered how we were sourcing and manufacturing. The introduction of advanced technologies, machine tools, 3D printing, a lot of technology that's been introduced that improves efficiency overall. That's another good reason to reshore. U.S. federal, state, and local incentives, including the three big acts that were passed in the last couple of years. The Infrastructure Act, which includes a lot of green energy manufacturing. The CHIPS and Science Act, which is focused primarily on semiconductors and related sciences. I think upstate New York has benefited significantly from that particular act, with a big production facility that's being built in upstate New York. The Inflation Reduction and Sustainability Act was also included green energy, a fairly good chunk of green energy, and the Infrastructure Act that is focused on rebuilding bridges and roads, railroads, airports, and so forth, which is essential to supply chain operating well. There's also, an ongoing effort to enforce Buy America Act. So we've had a lot of laws on the books in the U.S. for a long time about the U.S. government buying goods that are made in the U.S. But the buyers of those, the procurement officers, the buyers of those goods have made the case for buying cheaper products. They're actually spending our tax dollars, and so they wanted to buy cheaper products from overseas, and we're making a case to do that. So it wasn't very enforced. As a result, we sort of looked the other way and bought a lot of stuff from China. Now there's enhanced enforcement of that Buy America Act. So those same procurement officers now have to make a fairly significant case for why they might be buying non-US goods, especially on behalf of the US government. And then there's a new Buy America, Build America, Buy America Act, BABA, which is for infrastructure building that requires a big percentage of your goods to be manufactured in the U.S. So hopefully that's going to also affect how many goods are manufactured in the U.S. Okay, so if you're in a manufacturing environment, how do you figure out what you should focus on to bring manufacturing back? Well, the biggest focus is on the cost structure of your product. So let's say, for example, you're making apparel or footwear, and about 50% of the cost of making your product or more is labor. If you can see the pictures at the bottom, this is a shoe factory that I visited. I was engaged by a shoe manufacturer. They sent me to all their factories in China and Vietnam. And this is a shoe factory producing athletic shoes. You know, when you turn over your shoe and there are all those little squares and patterns on the bottom of the shoe, each one of those little squares are glued by hand, believe it or not. And then they go through a heat treat process so they meld together. But I was astonished. Honestly, I've seen a lot of stuff and I was astonished by how much labor was involved. There are over 200 steps included in manufacturing a shoe, and it has a significant amount of labor involved. At the top of the shoe, you've got textiles. So the breathable material on your athletic shoes, it might be canvas or some other synthetic textile. On top of it is made by a textile plant. So you see the picture in the middle? That's a textile plant. And if you've ever been in one, there aren't any people there. It's just all machines. So it has the production of textiles a very low labor content. So here we're making textiles for the tops of the shoes and the shoes that require a lot of labor. So how do you decide what should come back? Well, if you have a fully automated factory with very little labor content, you have the ability to put that factory in a lot of different places in the world, including the US. That's because our labor rates are high, but you have very little labor involved if you're making some kind of product that is fully automated. If you're making a low-cost product that includes a lot of labor, such as shoes, apparel, electronics, Apple iPhones, then you need to look for a low-cost labor environment because you have a lot of labor involved. So we take our clients through that kind of analysis to determine whether or not it's appropriate to even think about bringing manufacturing back or to bring manufacturing to a lower-cost country such as the central Mexico. So knowing your product cost structure is the first step, and then understanding other parts of the total cost of ownership. There are a lot of TCO models out there, and on the internet you can find all sorts of TCO models. But evaluating the total cost is a really good sort of platform, a jumping off point for considering a reshoring decision. So a lot of companies are rethinking their global sourcing and manufacturing strategy now because of all these things that have happened in the past few years. Most of our clients are embracing a China plus one strategy, and that means keeping some manufacturing in China and bringing some to another country, hopefully the US. That's what we encourage. But very often it's keeping some manufacturing in China and opening a new factory in Mexico. Mexico is particularly important because of the proximity to the U.S. market, but also because the labor rates in Mexico are about half, believe it or not, they are half of what they are in China. And we did a study that's posted on our landing page at the Reshoring Institute about global labor rates. We compared 10 job categories in 12 countries. And the lowest cost for labor is in that we compared. So there may be some lower cost countries in Africa that we didn't look at, but the lower cost countries are India, Mexico, and Vietnam. India has its own infrastructure problems, and it's a long way away, and there's difficulty in overseeing projects there. Uh, Vietnam only has 90 million people, and they're kind of full up. It's hard to find a factory in Vietnam these days. And Mexico, because of the proximity, is sort of ideal. The labor rates in central Mexico are very low, amongst the lowest in the world. Along the border, the labor rates are higher, but still considerably lower. So a lot of our clients have decided a China Plus One strategy, definitely focused on more domestic sourcing and building inventory to avoid stockouts like we did during the pandemic. The U.S.-Mexico border, this is Otay Mesa in San Diego. It's about 20 miles east of downtown San Diego along the border. This is a commercial crossing. That means that pedestrians can't or private vehicles can't cross here. It's just commercial crossing. And it was built because there was so much cross-border commerce coming across the border. This is a picture that I took at the border. And you look at the trucks that are lined up waiting to cross from Mexico to the U.S. But the important thing, and the reason why we went down to the border to have a look, was because these factories on the right, if you drive along the border, a lot of them have Chinese lettering on the factory. And so what we found out was the Chinese factory owners are very smart, and what they've done is buy factories in Mexico. So it isn't that they're importing kits or whatever and assembling in Mexico and bringing them into the U.S., because that does not qualify for made in Mexico. That still is country of origin China. But instead, they're actually buying factories that are using parts from Mexico, Mexican labor, and producing products that can then be brought across the border under USMCA duty free. So at this time, those goods are all duty free. Now, there's been saber rattling that the U.S. government, under the new Trump administration, wants to put tariffs on those incoming parts from Mexico. And we'll see if that's even legal under USMCA, or if it's just a negotiating tactic. But either way, it's going to disrupt that cross-border commerce and a low-cost origin place for products coming into the U.S. This is a picture at the border in Laredo, Texas. Now, I've been all over the world, seen a lot of stuff, but nothing like what I saw in Laredo. I swear I was astonished. Laredo crosses 14,000 trucks per day. And we met with the economic development people there, and I kept asking, are you sure it's 14,000 trucks a day? They assured me, yes, indeed. Mostly it's automotive and industrial equipment that's coming across the border. But what they've done is implement significant technology. So as the trucks approach the border crossing, there's a long corridor that they have to drive through. And in that corridor, there is electronics that weigh the truck, scan the back of the truck, look at the driver. They have facial recognition to make sure the driver is legit. They have barcodes on the equipment so they know that the truck and trailer are what is to be expected. They match that up. That information is matched up with the pre-entered documentation, and if it matches with what has already been pre-entered into the system, then the truck goes right on through. They get a green light and they just drive across the border. It takes about 20 seconds for these drivers to move through that corridor. And that's how they get 14,000 trucks across the border every day. I mean, it was truly astonishing. I took one of our interns to Laredo. We stood up there on the international bridge and watched for about 20 minutes. And I got to say, I've never seen anything like it anywhere else in the world. It was quite amazing. And I think it represents the kind of growth in cross border commerce that's been going on for the last 5 years or so and will continue to go forward because of the low cost nature of Mexican production. Okay, so we're in the final stretch here. I want to talk about leaving China or leaving any foreign country. You might think you can just tell your production facility, I'm going to leave. We're going to take our production somewhere else and close up shop, turn off the lights, lock the door, go home. Not so easy. Hang on a minute. I mean, this is a big deal that not everybody can talk to because they don't have the experience in China like we do at the Reshoring Institute. So it's not so easy to leave a foreign location. First of all, your employees in China, whether it's at an outsourced factory or your own factory, are on employment contracts. And that means that when you go to work, even as a factory worker, you sign a 1 or 2 year contract to be employed at that factory. If you leave, if your production leaves that factory, you have to pay out to the end of those contracts. It's a big surprise to CFOs that I'm working with where I say, to consider the payouts that are required. You might have 100 or 200 employees in China, and you have to pay them for their contracts to the end. So that's a big surprise to a lot of companies. You also have to get a permit to leave. You can't just pack up and leave, go away. You have to apply for a permit in China to leave. Now, if you don't, you could just escape in the middle of the night and get on a plane and go away. But you may never be allowed to go back to China. And because the Asian growth rates are somewhere north of 14% across all Asia, you want to keep an eye on what's happening in the Asia market and probably continue to manufacture there, or will be doing that in the future. So you don't want to just leave and try to avoid the laws in China. There's often wait time, particularly if you're manufacturing some goods that are of high importance. A lot of technology, for example. Chinese government doesn't want you to leave, and so they're going to slow walk your permit process. It might take you a year or two to get out of China. If you sent tools, dies, and molds to your factory in China, you can kiss those goodbye. Even if you have put that into the contract that they belong to you, they don't. Once they go into a factory in China, they're considered part of the infrastructure, and the Chinese are going to say, it's mine now. I've got it. Possession is, what do they say, 9/10 of the law. And also, the Chinese government won't allow you to export used products. So if you have a tool or die that's used, you're probably never getting it back. I mean, there are some exceptions, but by and large, that's another one of those discussions I've had with CFOs saying, you know, that $100,000 mold that you have, got to write it off. You're not getting it back. You've also taught the manufacturer in China how to produce your goods. You've given them your schematics, your blueprints, the quality standards. You've told them who your suppliers are. They can see that. You've taught them how to produce your goods. You think they're going to go to sleep at night and forget? They're going to come back to work. If you leave the factory, they're going to come back to work the next day and continue to produce your products under a different brand name, but your products, because you've taught them how to do it. There are also supply-based considerations. When we moved stuff to China, all the suppliers went with them. Now we have to reestablish that supply base in the U.S. This is our friend Chip Starnes. Chip was a Florida man. I love that. Talking about Florida man. When Chip was making medical consumables. So those are things that are throwaways like needles and syringes and plastic parts and so forth that are throwaways in a medical environment. Cheap stuff, thousands and thousands of them. And Chip figured out that he could produce them cheaper in India. So he decided to move the factory to India. So he started packing things up. The employees got wind of what he was doing. And they captured him and put him in his office and locked him in his office. So he was there for 2 weeks. Now they were feeding him and everything. It wasn't like they were, abusing him, but he couldn't leave his office. The employees were guarding the office, wouldn't let him out. And so they were captured him because they wanted payouts of their contracts. And he refused to do that. He was going to just leave. So what he eventually did, and in China, the police are not there to keep the peace like they are in the US. They're not peace officers. In China, the police are there to enforce the laws of China. So if you have some kind of commercial dispute like this, they don't care. They're not coming. So you're kind of stuck there trying to manage on your own. And so what he finally did was he figured out there was an NBC news crew filming nearby, and somehow he got in touch with them, and they came and filmed this picture and sort of shamed the Chinese government into forcing them to let him out. But they only did that after he agreed to pay out all the employment contracts. This is not unusual. So many executives are captured and kept hostage until they finalize their contracts. If you have a trademark and brand names in China, better get them registered sooner than later. It's also not uncommon for a Chinese factory that's producing your goods to register your trademark and your brand name under their own name in China. And you have little or no legal recourse. If that happens, the Chinese government says whoever registered it first owns the trademark. So if you decide to pick up and leave, this company is still producing your goods. They can use your brand name. How'd you like that? Some of these big brand names like Burberry and some of the others struggle with this on an ongoing basis where the trademark doesn't hold any water in China and you have no legal recourse because the company that's making the products has registered the trademark. The same is true for other countries where you potentially are moving to. So let's say you decide to move from China to Mexico. In Mexico, the Chinese factory owner may go get there first and register your brand and trademark under their name in Mexico. First come, first serve. So you better get on the ball and register your trademark and brand name in every country where you're operating. Okay, permits to leave China. I talked about this a little bit before. The Chinese government requires permits to shut down factories. There may be wait time, and some industries may never be allowed to leave, especially if they're high-value industries such as aircraft avionics, that sort of thing. The Chinese government may not allow you to leave. You got to be smart about ending a supplier contract. Plan, and never give advance notice. Never, ever, ever. You got to plan everything behind the scenes. Make sure that your legal aspect is tight. Make sure you're registered and your trademark. Make sure you know what the payment is going to be required for payout of contracts, of labor contracts. And so when you're ending a contract, you have to have all this stuff done in advance or you're going to get stuck. You'll have sabotage, you'll have low quality goods coming out, you'll have slowdowns in production, all kinds of bad stuff can happen if you don't plan in advance. As I mentioned before, this is a picture I took of a sewing factory. I think this one was in Vietnam. Usually when you tour these factories, the workers keep their heads down. They don't look at you. You can't get a picture of their face, but this young woman happened to look up just as I was taking a picture. But you can see there's lines and hundreds of employees in these sewing factories. You've taught the factory how to manufacture your product, who your suppliers are, the quality standards. You've provided the tools, the molds, the blueprints. And, they're not going to just go to sleep at night, like I said, and wake up the next day and forget how to make your product. They're going to continue to make it either under your brand name or a different brand name and compete with you on the world market. Who owns your tools, dies, and molds? So a lot of companies will. This is a toy factory, by the way, north of Shenzhen, China, that I visited. They're making plastic parts for toys. Isn't it pretty? It's kind of dark in there. Your tools, dies, and molds, if you had them made in China, let's say you paid a vendor to make a mold for you in China, you paid them $15,000. And it's used in the factory. Who owns that? Is it you because you paid for it? Or is it the factory because it's a Chinese factory? Always an item to consider and in contention. Redeveloping your supply base. So as I mentioned, as companies offshore to China, all the suppliers went with them. And so if you're going to come back to the US or to other countries, you have to redevelop that supply base. And we usually tell our clients it'll take you about 18 months to redevelop it. And that means you have to reteach factories how to make your product because their facilities are no longer there. They may have capital investment. There's a long process in developing new suppliers. Okay, here's your checklist for leaving China. You thought it was going to be easy. It's not easy. Planning is key, and keeping all information confidential until you're totally prepared and ready to make that announcement. It's not like in the US where you would say, well, we're going to close the factory in 3 months or 5 months or whatever. No. Not in China. Don't make that announcement in advance. Register your trademarks. Work with knowledgeable advisors and attorneys and consultants on extracting yourself. Review the employment contracts, review the tools, dies, and molds that you may have to write off. Do everything that's required under Chinese laws and advise the employees at the last possible minute. And this is my contact information. Reach out to us, especially go to our website. It's reshoringinstitute.org. We're a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization. We publish all of our research, case studies, and so forth. And if we have time, I'm open to take some questions.
Rosemary, thank you. We will stay as long as you'll stay and answer any questions anyone may have. I shared your links in the chat, so if anyone doesn't have the chat open, please go to the chat and listen to the podcast, go to our website, send her an email with a question. A lot of people might be watching the replay, so send an email. It's right on screen with your question. And does anyone have a question they'd like to ask right now?
I don't look like it. I answered everything.
Adrian Betts.
Sure, I'll ask a question. Good morning, good afternoon, good day to everybody out there. So with the reshoring or bringing things back to America, what's that going to do in general to all the prices? Is that just going to make everything go up even more than it's been going up? And then are we going to see another doubling or quadrupling of prices? What do you think that's going to do?
Yes, I think so. I think we're going to see an increase in prices, especially if there is a significant tariff that's placed on China and other countries for imports. That cost has got to be passed on to somebody. Somebody's got to pay it. And the manufacturer very often doesn't have the margin to do that, or they don't want to do it, and so they will pass the additional cost in terms of increase in prices to consumers. So yeah, it's very inflationary. It's likely to have prices go up again, which we've suffered through that in the last few years. And I don't think it's going to get any better if those tariffs go into effect. The other thing that that's on the U.S. side, but these kind of tariffs and trade wars really damage our global relationships, and it makes it difficult to do business around the world when you don't have a friendly trading relationship with other countries. So, it's got ramifications not just for us as citizens paying more money, but it also puts us in and then kind of a difficult position, I guess, around the world. And going forward, that will have a major impact on how we operate as citizens.
Now, a follow up to that would be, prices, if they double, quadruple again, I don't care how good my money is, I'm going to buy less of stuff. And so,
Right.
Is this sustainable for these companies? Because if they're used to selling 1 million units a year, there's nobody they're not going to have the customer base that's going to sustain that at double or quadruple the prices. So now what they used to sell 1 million a year, now the demand is only for 250,000 a year. And then what does that look like? Do you see another business apocalypse coming also right behind this?
Yep, that's the worst case scenario, Adrian. You're really you're really right. You're onto it. There is a tumbling effect, sort of a downhill effect to having tariffs. So the first thing that happens is it's more expensive to buy parts, and most manufacturers in the U.S. buy parts from overseas. So this isn't a one-off kind of situation. This is most manufacturers are buying parts and importing them. So there's a cost effect that goes to increased prices to consumers, less demand, which has an effect on the manufacturer, as you mentioned, as you pointed out. That changes their economic situations. A lot of companies can't sustain it if they don't have enough demand. They're going to go out of business. So it's both inflationary. Tariffs are both inflationary and recessionary. So that's likely to throw us into some kind of recession as well. So I hate to be the harbinger of doom and gloom, but this is economics 101 on how this has an economic negative effect throughout the U.S. economy as well as throughout the world.
Last call and questions. I know Rosemary stayed late with us. A lot of us, it's a lunch and learn, so we're taking a long lunch. So we have time for maybe one more if someone has one. If not, we'll wrap up. Larry Maggio, any thoughts from you?
Yes. So I sat here and listened and thought, oh, I know what reshoring is. I know what nearshoring is. I mean, we teach this stuff, for God's sake. And so now I know there's a lot more to it that I didn't know. And I guess my message is that as an organization, ASCM Rochester is really here to educate and train, and we can't do it alone. Obviously, there's nice APICS literature to help us. It prompts us. It covers all the major points. You get certifications for it. People think you're smart, and that's a good thing. You probably are anyway. But the reality is, it's things like these lunch and learns with a laser focus on going deeper behind the scenes, and then you get the rest of the story. And I won't tell you who that comes from. Oh, I will. It's Paul Harvey, but that's an old guy. But the rest of the story is what's most important, because it helps develop understanding. And Rosemary, I got to tell you, it was a very lively and quite honestly well thought out presentation that helps me, at least personally, remember with your pictures and your commentary. So thank you.
Great. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Rosemary, I want to respect your time. There's one more question in the chat. Do you have time for that? Or
Yeah, sure.
Julia asked, any advice for a student or young professional? So general question, advice for a student or a young professional?
Yeah, I try to encourage everybody, including my own grandkids that are in college and, studying, to take supply chain classes and to think about a career in supply chain. I mean, it's just been tremendous for me. But right now in this environment, it's a very rich kind of career going forward. Not only does it pay well, it's extremely interesting. It involves the whole world, so it's not, just one little geographic region, but the whole world. You get exposure to people everywhere and all kinds of processes. You can think big about economic issues. I mean, it's really a very robust kind of career, and I would highly recommend it.
I think this is a good time, and whether you guys have camera on or off, everybody, let's unmute and give Rosemary a round of applause. This was a great session today. Via email, you'll receive the recording. And I think we'll be doing some more of these. I hear people, everybody on mute. Let's show some love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosemary.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
We'll see everyone soon. Make sure you connect with her.